Welcome back. We're going to cover Chapter 8 in this video, and this is a chapter on verbs. We're going to cover these topics during this tutorial. There are three kinds of verbs we're going to discuss in the first part. There are action verbs, which, that means that something's going on, there's action. There are linking verbs, which link one thing to another, and then there's helping verbs that add on to verbs that help them get the point across. Okay, first of all, we're going to talk about action verbs. They tell what the subject does. These can include physical and mental actions. As in these examples, Mark Zuckerberg created, he's doing action here, the Facebook site. He hopes, which is a mental action. People of all ages will use this networking site. So the subject is doing the action. Mark Zuckerberg's the subject, and this is the action. And he is a pronoun, which is the subject of the sentence, and hopes is the verb. Okay, action verbs can be transitive or intransitive. And the way to remember this is transitive verbs express action toward a person or thing, and it requires a direct object, a noun or pronoun, to complete its meaning. So here we go. The committee developed, here's our verb, and they developed what? The committee is doing action toward guidelines. They're developing the guidelines. So this is a transitive verb because it requires a direct object, which is the guidelines in this particular sentence. Okay, they can be intransitive, and intransitive verbs have action, but they don't require an object. So Kim Collins works. I could put a period right here and it would make sense. So the rest of this is a prepositional phrase, and so nothing's being directed towards it. So this is an intransitive verb. Okay, let's try this. McDonald's gave coupons to the winners. What are the transitive verbs and their objects? Okay, so the transitive verb would be gave, and they gave what? Coupons. This is a prep phrase, so you can temporarily ignore it. Okay, the winners ate free Big Macs. What would be our transitive verb? It would be ate. And then what did they eat? The winners ate Big Macs. They were free, which that's an adjective telling what kind of Big Macs they were. Please lay the coupons on the counter. Okay, so our verb is lay. And then our object would be coupons. We're laying the coupons. Remember, the is an article, but it also is an adjective. Okay, now we're going to pick out intransitive verbs. Greg listened carefully to the proposal. Well, Greg listened. Carefully to the proposal is not an object, so this is an intransitive verb in this instance. I worked at that job for 9 years. Our intransitive verb is worked. At that job is a prepositional phrase, and for 9 years is a prepositional phrase. So it's not the object of this verb. So this is an intransitive verb. Before the test, Jackie studied very hard. Well, actually Jackie is the subject and studied is the verb. This is just telling how hard she studied. It's not really an object. So studied is our intransitive verb. Alright, we're next going to talk about linking verbs. And linking verbs link subjects and words that rename them. A noun, pronoun, or an adjective that renames a subject is called a complement. Notice that it's spelt with an E instead of an I. It doesn't mean the same thing as I compliment your makeup or whatever. This is different, and you may have a test question on this, so you might want to pay attention to that. Hint, hint. Okay, for example, Betty Ray is the new vice president. Is the verb linking Betty Ray and the new vice president because they are the same thing. This is just describing Betty Ray. This is called the complement. The engine sounds good. Now some of these linking verbs can be what they call to-be verbs, and this is a list of some of them. And then other things that can be used as linking are sense experiences. So feels, appear, taste, seem, and so on. So sounds would be in this category. The engine sounds good. This word is linking engine and good because this is how the engine sounds. So that's a complement. Okay, now let's find the linking verbs and complements. The caller could have been Jeremy. Okay, so what is the linking verb? It happens to be been. And then these are helping verbs, which we'll talk about next. And then the complement would be Jeremy. Jeremy and the caller would be the same thing. It was he who called yesterday. So what would be our linking verb? Well, it would be the word was, the verb was. It and he are the same thing. So he would be the complement. Sheila felt bad about the news. Well, here's one of those linking verbs that has to do with senses. Sheila felt bad. So Sheila, this is telling how Sheila felt. Bad is how she felt. Okay, now we're going to talk about helping verbs, and they're added to the main verbs to create verb phrases. And then some of the common ones are the to be's, like we talked in the last slide, forms of to have, forms of to do, and can, must, ought, might, could, will, etc. Kim Collins is applying for a new job. Applying is our main verb and is our helping verb. Whoops. So the verb is plus the main verb of applying create a verb phrase. Okay, let's find the helping verbs and the main verbs. The applicant could have arrived earlier. So the helping verb would be could have, and then arrived is our main verb. So these are just helping this main verb make more sense. It can be difficult to accept change. So what is our main verb? It would be difficult. So can and be, can is the helping verb and be is the main verb. This one kind of threw me too, so sometimes you have to really analyze them. Okay, Susan has run a mile in less than 7 minutes. So what is our main verb? It would be run. So has would be our helping verb. Okay, there's two categories of transitive verbs. They are active and passive voice. And when a verb expresses action directed toward the subject, or directed by the subject toward the object, the verb is an active voice. They also call active voice the voice of business or force. You might hear it called different terms. When you're writing in this voice, you're clear, direct, and forceful. If you go on and continue and take business communications, we'll talk a lot about this because there's times when you want to write in active voice and there's times when you want to write in passive voice depending on the message you're wanting to send. A passive voice is directed toward the subject. The action of the transitive verb is directed toward the subject instead of by it. And so it's called the passive voice. The passive voice is often called the voice of tact. So sometimes when you're wanting to give a bad message to somebody, you'll use the passive voice. Sometimes they're used to soften or disguise things, or when you want to be indirect, such as giving bad news. Okay, for example, the active voice of this sentence would be we answer email messages within 24 hours. This is the subject doing some action toward an object. In the passive voice, we would say email messages are answered within 24 hours. One of the giveaways is if there is a helping verb in front of the verb. Sometimes that's going to be your indication that that's a passive voice. Here's another example. DataPro expanded its operations. So they're just coming right out saying DataPro is the subject, expanded, and then this is the object. In the passive voice, we would say operations in the Southwest were expanded. So here again we have that little extra verb here. Mr. Lee miscalculated. So Mr. Lee is a subject and he's miscalculating, and then here's our object. If I say it in passive voice, current operating expenses were miscalculated. So here again we have that extra verb. Okay, let's identify the active voice and the passive voice by we're using an underline and a shading. Okay, the bank stopped payment on the check last week. Okay, I'm going to say this is the active voice. They stopped payment. The bank is the subject, and they stopped payment. Taylor discovered the losses. Taylor's the subject, discovered is the verb, and the losses would be the object. So this is an active voice. The losses were discovered last week. Here's that extra verb. Discovered is our main verb. So this is going to be passive voice. Statements were issued for all past due accounts. Here we go with the extra verb. Were issued. So I'd say this is passive voice. There's no object because this is a prepositional phrase after this, so there's no object after it. Another clue. Okay, and then verbs come in moods, and there's 3 moods that express attitude toward a subject. There's the indicative mood, which expresses facts. Imperative mood, which expresses commands. And then there's the subjunctive mood that expresses doubts, conjectures, or suggestions. We're going to focus on subjunctive because these other two, you probably already understand those pretty well. Okay, the subjunctive mood usually has 3 constructions: the doubtful statement, the that clause, and the motion. So if a statement is doubtful or contrary to the fact, or if it's introduced by if, as if, or wish, the subjunctive form were is substituted for the indicative form was. What this means is sometimes when we would typically say was, if we have this word if, as if, wish, or were, we're going to use the subjunctive form were in place. So if I were boss, and I'm not, so it's the wishful thinking, things would be different. He acts as if he were, not was, his father. Here's that as if, so we're going to use the subjunctive form of were, not was. But if a statement could possibly be true, we could use the other form, or the indicative form. If Mr. Cavello was at the meeting, I did not see him. He could have been there, but I didn't see him. So we would use, since this could be true, possibly, we would use was instead of were. Okay, this is going to conclude this part. Go to part 2 to get the rest of the story.